My husband put a DNA test on the kitchen table, slid it toward me, and said, "She's not mine, Elena, and I think you already knew." For a second, I couldn't hear anything. Not the clock, not the baby monitor, not the rain that had started somewhere over the mountains while I was driving home. Just a high, thin ringing, the kind you get after a blast, the kind I knew from a place 8,000 miles away that I had spent 14 months trying to survive. Priya was asleep down the hall, 4 months old. She had my mother's chin and Adam's exact ears, and I had watched her come into the world in a military hospital with Adam holding my hand and crying. And now he was sitting across from me with a folded sheet of paper telling me she belonged to someone else. "Adam," my voice came out steady. I was proud of that later. "Look at me." He didn't. "Where did you get that test?" "It doesn't matter where I got it. It matters to me." He pushed it another inch across the table, like the paper itself was the argument. 0%. It says 0% probability of paternity. You can read it yourself. I did not touch it. I want you to understand something about me before I tell you the rest of this, because everything that happened next only makes sense if you understand it. I don't panic. It isn't courage. People think it's courage, and it isn't. It's training, and it's the particular thing that training does to a person after enough years. When the worst arrives, most people feel the floor drop. I feel the opposite. Everything goes very slow and very clear, and a quiet voice in the back of my head starts making a list. The voice was already making a list. The list said, "He is not surprised. He is not heartbroken. He rehearsed this. Somebody handed him this paper and told him what to say, and he practiced it in the mirror while you were still on a plane." "Okay," I said. Adam blinked. "Okay?" "Okay, I heard you." I pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, slow, the way you sit when you don't want a frightened animal to bolt. "Now I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and how you answer them is going to matter more than anything else you do for the rest of your life. Do you understand me?" Something flickered in his face. For just a second, he looked less like a man delivering a verdict and more like a man who had gotten in over his head. "Elena, question 1. I folded my hands on the table. Did you take a sample from Priya yourself?" He hesitated. "No." "Then who did?" He looked at the window. "Question 2, I said. Whose lab is on that report?" It's a lab, a real one." "You didn't read the letterhead?" "I read enough." Question 3, I leaned forward. "Where is your mother right now?" And Adam Frost, my husband of 6 years, the man who had proposed to me in the rain outside a base chapel, went completely still. To understand how I ended up at that table, you have to go back 11 hours, to the moment my boots hit the jet bridge and I was home. 14 months, that's how long I'd been gone. Priya had been born during my mid-tour leave, 2 weeks in a fog of joy and no sleep, and then I'd had to hand her back to Adam and get on a plane and fly back to the other side of the planet, and I had counted the days on the inside of my locker door with a pen. I hadn't told Adam my exact flight. I'd wanted to surprise them. I had this whole picture in my head, walking through the door, Priya's face, Adam lifting her up so she could see me. Then, 3 hours out, he texted, "Don't be late tonight. Mom has a surprise waiting for you." I smiled at that in the back of a rideshare with my duffel between my knees. A surprise. Diane and I had never been close. She'd made it clear from the first Thanksgiving that I was not what she'd pictured for her son. But a homecoming was a homecoming, and I'd let myself imagine just for a second that 14 months and a granddaughter might have softened something. I should have paid more attention to the word mom, because here is a thing I know, and knew even then underneath the hope. Diane Frost did not do surprises for me. Diane Frost did surprises to me. The house was full of cars when I pulled up. Not a party. I want to be clear about that. A party has music, has movement, has somebody's kid running across the lawn. This was silent. 6, 7 cars parked at careful angles, and every window lit, and no sound at all. I stood on my own front step in my own service uniform with 14 months of dust still somewhere in my lungs, and I felt the training wake up. Something is wrong here. Count the exits. I opened the door. The living room was full of people. Adam's relatives, his aunt, his cousins, 2 men I half recognized from the wedding, and Diane in the center of them all, in a mauve cardigan, sitting in the good chair like a judge on a bench. They all turned to look at me at once. Nobody said welcome home. Nobody said anything. Priya was in Diane's lap, my daughter, in that woman's lap, and when I stepped toward her, Diane's arms tightened just slightly, just enough. "Elena," Diane said, "we need to talk about the baby." And from the kitchen doorway, Adam would not meet my eyes. I had walked into rooms like this before, different rooms, different countries, but the same shape, the shape of an ambush where everyone but you already knows the plan. My body knew it before my mind did. The stillness came down over me like a visor. "Where's Priya's diaper bag?" I said, not a question. The relatives glanced at each other. "Sit down," Diane said. "You're not going to make a scene." "I'm not making anything." I held out my arms. "Give me my daughter." And that was the moment Adam stepped forward with the folded paper already in his hand and said the sentence he'd been practicing. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because the paper wasn't the trap. The paper was the bait. I did not take Priya from Diane's lap by force. I want that on the record, because there was a version of that night where I did, where I crossed the room and took my child and dared any one of them to stop me, and I have thought about that version many times since. It would have felt good for about 4 seconds. Then it would have cost me everything. Because a woman who grabs a baby out of her grandmother's arms in a room full of witnesses is unstable, is a threat, is exactly the story they had gathered to tell. 7 cars, 7 witnesses. That was the trap, not the DNA test, the audience. So instead, I lowered my arms. "All right," I said, "let's talk about the baby." I saw it land. Diane had braced for a fight, and I hadn't given her one. And for just a moment, she didn't know what to do with her own momentum. The relatives shifted. One of the cousins, a soft-faced man named Toby, actually looked embarrassed to be there. "Adam had something to show you," Diane said, recovering. Adam came forward. His hand was shaking, I noticed that. A man certain of his cause does not shake. "Elena, I had a test done." He held out the paper. "On Priya, it came back 0%. I nodded. "You said, in the kitchen, you'll say it again in about 20 minutes, and you'll think it's the first time." I let that sit. A couple of the relatives frowned, not understanding. "Who ordered the test, Adam?" "I did." "No." I kept my voice gentle. Gentle is worse than loud in a room like that. Loud, they can dismiss. Gentle, they have to listen to. So I'm going to ask the room instead. I turned, slowly, and looked at Diane. "Who ordered the test?" Diane's chin lifted. "I did what my son couldn't bring himself to do." The relatives went very quiet. "There it is," I said. Let me tell you what I knew about Diane Frost standing in that room. I knew that she had never once in 6 years called me by my rank, though she wore her late husband's Navy service like a crown at every dinner. I knew, because Adam let it slip once, guilty and drunk, that when Priya was born, Diane's first words on the phone had not been about the baby. They'd been, "Well, at least now he has something of his own." Something of his own. I'd turned that phrase over for months in a plywood hut on the other side of the world, because it told me how Diane saw my daughter, not as a person, but as property, as the one Frost asset that the army wife couldn't take away when she inevitably ruined everything. And now, here was a piece of paper that said Priya wasn't mine. Do you see it yet? I saw it in the kitchen later, all at once. The test wasn't meant to prove Priya wasn't Adam's. The test was meant to prove Priya wasn't mine. 0% maternity, not paternity. Adam had misread his own mother's weapon. Diane had never cared whether Adam was the father. She cared about getting me, the soldier, the outsider, legally severed from the child. A mother with no biological claim, accused of fraud, unstable, deployed, gone 14 months. In a custody fight, that woman loses. Diane hadn't come to end a marriage. She'd come for Priya. "I'd like everyone to leave," I said. Nobody moved. "I'm not going to ask again nicely, and I'm not going to ask meanly, because that's what she wants. She wants you all to go home tonight and tell your husbands that the army wife lost it." I looked around the room, meeting each pair of eyes in turn, the way I'd learned to address a formation. "So I'm going to say it once, calm, and you're going to remember that I was calm. This is my house. That is my daughter. And whatever my mother-in-law told you was going to happen here tonight is not going to happen." Toby stood up first. "That's usually how it goes. It only takes one." He mumbled something about letting family talk and reached for his jacket, and once one moved, the rest remembered they had somewhere else to be. The aunt gave Diane a look I couldn't read on the way out. In 90 seconds, the living room was down to 4 people. Me, Adam, Diane, and Priya still in Diane's lap, who chose that moment to wake up and start to fuss. "Give her to me," I said. "She needs—" Diane, I crouched down so I was level with the baby, not looming, my hands open. She's rooting, she's hungry. In about 40 seconds, she's going to scream, and you either can be the woman who handed a hungry infant to her mother, or the woman who held on to her while she cried in a room full of people who just left. Those are the 2 things you get to be tonight. Choose." For a long moment, Diane didn't move. Then Priya screwed up her face and let out that first hitching wail, and Diane's arms opened, reflexively, an old grandmother's reflex older than her scheme, and I lifted my daughter out of her lap and against my chest, and felt her whole small weight settle into me for the first time in 14 months. I did not cry, not there. I'd cry later, in the nursery, with the door locked, and Priya on my shoulder, so hard I had to sit down on the floor, but not there. There, I turned to my husband, with our daughter finally in my arms, and I said the thing that ended the first half of that night and began the second. "Adam, go get the test, the real one, the one in the envelope your mother told you not to show me." His face drained white. Because there was a second envelope. I knew there had to be. You don't hand a man a result and let him keep the paperwork unless there's other paperwork you're keeping from him. "How?" he started. "Because she used you, and she's not finished. That test doesn't say what you think it says. Go and read the top line out loud, and then you're going to understand what your mother actually did." Diane stood up. "That's enough," she said, and for the first time her voice wasn't cold, it was frightened. That's how I knew I was right. Adam went to get the envelope. I watched his mother watch him go, and I watched something come apart in her face. The particular horror of a person who has built a machine and just realized she can no longer stop it. "Adam," Diane said. "Adam, don't." He stopped in the hallway. "Why not?" "Because she's confusing you. That's what they train them to do. Manipulate, interrogate." She turned to me, and the mask was fully off now, and underneath it was something I almost respected for its honesty. "You think you're clever. You've been home 4 hours. 14 months, I said. I've been home 14 months of paying attention from 8,000 miles away because you called my daughter something of his own, and I've been waiting for you to make your move ever since." Adam came back with the envelope. It was cream-colored, thicker than the first, and his name was not on it. Diane's lawyer's name was in the corner. He turned it over in his hands like it might be hot. "Read the top line," I said. He opened it. He read it silently first, I watched his eyes track left to right, then stop, then go back and read it again, the way you do when a sentence won't resolve. Out loud, Adam. His voice came out cracked. Probability of maternity, Elena Frost and infant Priya Frost. He swallowed. 0%. The room was silent. Now read the second page, I said. The methodology. Read whose samples they used. He fumbled to the second page. Reference sample A. Buccal swab. Adult female. His mouth moved. Reference sample B. Buccal swab. Adult female. Labeled. He stopped. Labeled what, Adam? Labeled Elena Frost. He looked up and I watched the whole thing land on him at once, the way it had landed on me in the kitchen. But you weren't here. You've been deployed. Nobody swabbed you. So, whose cheek is in that envelope claiming to be mine? I said. We both looked at Diane. Here is what I had understood in the kitchen, in that slow, clear place where the list gets made. You cannot run a maternity test without a sample from the mother. I was on another continent. No one had swabbed me, so to produce a report that said I wasn't Priya's mother, someone had to submit a fake sample under my name, someone else's cheek cells labeled Elena Frost, guaranteed to not match the baby, because of course they wouldn't. They belonged to a different woman entirely. It wasn't a DNA test. It was a forgery with a lab's letterhead on it, and forging a sample under another person's name to a licensed lab to manufacture evidence for a custody claim, that is not a family argument. That is a felony. Several. You submitted a sample, I said to Diane, under my name to a real lab on a real requisition form with a real signature, mine, presumably, forged. I bounced Priya gently, automatically, and she quieted. Do you know what a lab does with the requisition forms, Diane? They keep them. 7 years. Chain of custody. It's the whole point of a lab. Diane said nothing. You didn't need the test to be true. You needed it to exist. You needed a piece of paper you could wave in a custody hearing that said the deployed soldier isn't even the mother. Unstable, fraudulent, gone. And a judge who's tired and behind schedule looks at that paper and a nice grandmother in pearls, and he gives you 6 months of temporary custody while it all gets sorted out. And 6 months is all you ever needed, because possession is the entire game. You have no idea what I've protected this family from. You're right. Tell the detective. I didn't call the police that night. I want to be honest about why, because it isn't the noble reason. It's that Adam was standing in the hallway holding a piece of paper that proved his mother had committed a crime to steal his daughter, and I watched 6 years of something rearrange itself behind his eyes, and I understood that if I picked up the phone right then, I would lose him to his own guilt. He would defend her. Blood does that. It makes people run back into the burning house. So I did something harder. I put Priya in her crib. I came back out, and I sat both of them down, the man who'd betrayed me and the woman who engineered it, and I laid the whole thing flat on the table, calm, the way I'd brief a room, no anger in it, because anger would have given them somewhere to hide. Here's where we are, I said. Diane, you forged a lab document under my name. That's fraud, and because you mailed it, it's probably wire and mail fraud, and because it was to interfere with a service member's custody during deployment, there are protections that turned that into something a JAG officer will find very interesting. I have the envelope, I have the requisition form, I have the lab's own records, which I will subpoena, which will show a sample submitted under my name on a date I was provably overseas. Diane's face had gone gray. Adam, I turned to my husband, you didn't order the test. You didn't forge the sample. Right now, tonight, you are a man who was lied to by his mother and believed her for one bad evening. That's forgivable. Barely, but it has a shelf life. I held his eyes.
The moment you choose to protect her instead of your daughter, you stop being the man who was lied to and you become part of the lie, and I will treat you exactly like I treat her." The clock ticked. "So this is the only question left tonight, and you both answer it now, in front of each other, so nobody can rewrite it later." I looked at Adam. "Whose side are you on?" And down the hall, through the monitor, Priya sighed in her sleep, small and warm, and completely unaware that in the next 10 seconds, in a quiet kitchen, her whole life was about to be decided.
Adam looked at his mother. I have wondered since what he saw. 64 years of her. The woman who'd raised him alone after his father's heart gave out, who'd worked 2 jobs, who'd told him every day of his life that family was the only thing that couldn't be taken from you. She had loved him. That was the terrible part. Everything she'd done inside a version of love so narrow it had turned into a cage. "Mom," Adam said, "did you swab Aunt Carol?" Diane flinched. That was the answer. Aunt Carol, his mother's sister, a woman who shared enough of Diane's DNA to look plausible and none of Priya's. Sample B, the forged mother. "I did it for you. For Priya, that woman is going to leave again. Next year, the year after, she'll get on another plane and she'll leave that baby with you, and then she'll come back and take her, and you'll be alone with your heart torn out. And I will not watch that happen to my son." "So you tried to make her a criminal?" Adam said. "I tried to make her leave." And there it was, the whole thing, finally said out loud in a kitchen at midnight. Adam was quiet for a long time. Then he did something I didn't expect. He crossed the room and he picked up both envelopes, the fake result and the forged requisition, and he held them out to me. "Keep these," he said, "somewhere she can't get them." Diane made a sound like she'd been struck. "I'm on Priya's side," Adam said, to the room, to me, to the monitor where his daughter slept. "Which means I'm on Elena's side. I'm sorry, Mom, I'm so sorry, but you don't get to burn down my family to save it." I'd like to tell you it ended cleanly. It didn't. Real things don't. Diane didn't go to prison. I made a choice about that, and I'll stand by it, though people have argued with me. I took the envelopes and the lab records to a JAG attorney and a family lawyer, and I built the file. The whole file, chain of custody, the works, exactly the way I'd threatened, and then I did not hand it to a prosecutor. I handed a copy to Diane. "This exists now," I told her. "It lives in 3 places you can't reach. If you ever, once in Priya's entire life, make a move toward her that I don't like, a lawyer, a whisper to a judge, a phone call, this file goes to the district attorney the same afternoon. You didn't want the test to be true. You wanted it to exist. Well, now something exists, and I'm the one holding it." She understood that. If nothing else, Diane Frost understood leverage. She sees Priya 4 times a year now, supervised, in my house, on my terms, and she is unfailingly, rigidly polite, and I watch her hold my daughter with the careful hands of a woman who knows exactly what it would cost her to be anything other than gentle. It's not forgiveness. I don't have that in me, not fully, not yet. It's something colder and more useful. It's a peace I control. Adam and I went to counseling for a year and a half. Some of you will think I should have left him. Some days I thought so too. He believed a piece of paper over the woman he'd married. For one long evening, he let a room full of his relatives look at me like I was a liar and a stranger. That doesn't wash out. But he also handed me the envelopes. In the one moment that his whole life came down to a single choice, with his mother weeping in front of him, he chose his daughter and he chose me. And I have spent enough time around people at their worst to know how rare that actually is, how many men in that kitchen would have run back into the burning house.
He didn't. He stayed in the doorway, and he chose us. So, we stayed. We're still staying. It's work. It's the good kind. Priya turned 2 last month. She has words now. She has opinions about which cup is correct. She calls me Mama, and she has no idea, none, that there is an envelope in a safe deposit box with her name on a lab form, or that on the night I came home from war, her whole future balanced on a kitchen table for the length of one sleeping sigh. She'll know someday, when she's old enough. I'll tell her the true version, not the one where her grandmother is a monster, because monsters are easy, and the truth is more useful than easy. I'll tell her that love, when it forgets that the other person is a whole entire human being and not something of your own, stops being love and becomes ownership, and that the two can look identical right until the moment they don't. And I'll tell her the thing I most want her to carry, that when the worst arrives, and it will, for her, some ordinary evening in some form I can't predict, she does not have to feel the floor drop. She can go still. She can go quiet and clear. She can sit down at the table across from the thing that's trying to take her whole life, and she can fold her hands, and she can say, "All right, let's talk." Then ask the right questions in the right order. The truth is almost always already in the room. Most people are just too frightened to make it speak. If someone once stayed in the doorway and chose you when it would have been easier to run, tell them today that you noticed. And if you are the one who's been holding still, holding a whole life together with steady hands while everyone assumed you'd break, I see you. Stay a while. There are more of us here than you'd think.